they were trying to decide, do we pay off our house or do we invest for retirement?
Sure.
And they're in their late 50s, early 60s, and they don't have that much for retirement yet. And so going through the numbers with them, I'm like, I know emotionally you want to have that house paid off and not have to worry about having a mortgage payment anymore. But because your rate is so low on your mortgage, they have like a 2.5%.
Sure.
Versus if they were to put the extra money into
float it. Yeah.
Into investments,
short treasuries or something.
Information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions and answers to questions do not involve the rendering of personalized investment advice, but are limited to the dissemination of general information. A professional advisor should be consulted before implementing any of the options presented. Encompass More Asset Management LLC is a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements.
I got something for us today.
Okay.
Self-directed IRAs. Okay. I don't give a lot of advice and I don't make a lot of recommendations on this podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm going to make 3 recommendations right now, and they pertain to self-directed IRAs. And for what it's worth, what I'm saying also applies to self-directed Roth IRAs. Okay. If you are considering rolling your IRA money into a self-directed situation and purchasing real estate, which I will highlight, we can help facilitate. If somebody logistically, we could help with this.
Yeah.
So it's not that I am apprehensive to this idea because of our business model or something like that. People claim to me all the time. It's not true. If you're thinking of doing that, you need to do 3 things. Okay. First thing, you need to go read the book. You can get on Amazon. It's called the Self-Directed IRA Handbook. It is written by somebody that specializes in doing this exact thing. And it lays out a really good framework for understanding what you're kind of getting into. Mm-hmm. The second is to go talk to your tax professional about it, right? Your CPA, hopefully one that's quite qualified. At this point, if the book hasn't scared you to death out of the idea and the CPA hasn't scared you to death, you might get fired by your CPA when you tell them you're going to do this. But they may let you. Okay. So the first recommendation, go read Self-Directed IRA Handbook. Second recommendation, go talk to your CPA about it. Third recommendation, whichever friend or influencer told you about it, fire that person out of your life. It is a horrible idea for almost everyone in almost every circumstance. Okay. It is an absolute ticking time bomb for most people. And what I mean by that is that, you have to follow all of these rules when you do a self-directed IRA, right? You cannot self-deal, and you can't, let's say you go buy a house, right? I'm going to flip a property. Okay. The minute you act as a general contractor on that home, you line up all the subs, you are potentially, the IRS could say that you're materially participating and self-dealing for your own benefit, and they can force an entire taxable distribution of your entire IRA right then. And if they do that later on, their ability to then assess taxes, additional taxes and penalties on that at that point, and interest, which by the way is not a low interest rate anymore,
right,
is massive. Okay. So as soon as you own a property in a self-directed IRA and you hire a company that employs your son-in-law's cousin, the IRS could say it's a related party, right?
Yeah.
That one's probably a little hyperbolic, but if they employ your son-in-law or something to that effect,
even
or
your child,
your child, your brother,
your spouse.
Yep. So you have to be you have to be so careful. It really needs to be something that is so arm's length. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have to understand that you can't just, if you have $1 million in a self-directed IRA, that doesn't mean you can go buy, 4 $250,000 properties, because as soon as there's a capital expenditure, right? As soon as the water heater goes out, the roof needs to be replaced. You have to have liquidity in IRA funds to be able to pay that bill. You cannot pay for any of that with your own personal funds.
I think a lot of people forget that and think that they'll just take it out of their checking or savings account and then reimburse it from the IRA, but you can't do that.
I think a lot of them will actually, truthfully, what I see in practice is that people will just pay the contractor themselves, and not pay for it through the IRA like they're supposed to.
Yeah. And
that's where they run into issues, right?
Yeah.
So you have this potential liquidity issue, and you can't, even if you have $3 million on the side, it's IRA money. You can't just go put more money in an IRA, right? There's limits to how much money you can get in there. So you potentially have some really big issues in that. So there's a ton of risk. And to what point, anyways?
Yeah.
Right?
How much does it really, how much value does it really provide with all of the nuances and the things that you are risking to utilize this account?
Net of hassle, there is, in my opinion, no alpha to be made in this play. You're taking an asset that has built-in tax advantages on its own and saying, I want to get rid of all of those tax advantages and I want to have it in my IRA. If you have it in a Roth, I guess, you keep them so you don't need them, but you could own other assets that wouldn't be tax efficient in the Roth IRA, and then own an asset that's inherently tax efficient on its own outside of that. Right. So it's poor asset location from a financial planning perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think most CFPs would agree with me on that. People trying to sell you real estate might not, but again, it just goes back to, we can help facilitate all this kind of stuff. And it's just not a good idea for so many people. Had to get that off my chest. I feel a little bit better now.
Oh, good.
I don't take clients. If there's anyone listening, I actually won't work with clients that have real estate in self-directed IRAs, because they almost universally, and I just have to say almost, because there could be somebody out there doing it the right way. I have yet to see a case where I think somebody is actually following all the rules and guidelines on self-directed IRAs. And they're a giant hassle and a giant headache for the investor.
And liability.
A ton of risk. It's not worth it. Now, I will say, if somebody's into real estate and they feel real estate is a place that they can get some alpha, and they want to do something like hard money lending, right? Private money lending. There is a way to do that if you have enough funds and enough risk capacity, and you're at that level of sophistication financially, right? That's an opportunity to have a non-correlated return to other investment opportunities, right? It's kind of a unique thing. You have the ability to have some of that control that people oftentimes are looking for. But there is still some risk you could be aware of. In particular, like if you have to foreclose on the property, now you own real estate in your self-directed IRA. So with potentially no access to, significant enough funds to finish a project that you just inherited or something, right? So you really have to underwrite those deals conservatively, really understand what you're doing, and have some help. Again, something that we can help people facilitate, right? We can give advice. We can, people pay us for our advice all the time. But they just got my advice for free, which is, I want to clarify, understand what you're doing and partner with, ask your CPA about it. When there is big tax implications on the line, don't take that lightly, and don't take the word of gurus, these TikTok gurus. I'm always a big advocate and recommend personalized individual advice.
And somebody that's going to be around. I think it goes back to that TikTok stuff. Those people they're just there for a moment. You're never going to be able to go back and be like, hey, you told me this and it didn't work out the way that you told me. They don't care. Right? Yeah. But if you're working with an actual professional, they're going to be there. They're going to go through it with you. And then if something goes wrong, then they're going to be there to suffer the consequences with you. So
yeah, more or less. Yeah. That's totally it. So, anyways, I was in an interaction that all came up, and I was like, this is so, I can't believe people are pushing this. And the other interesting thing is that one of the things I've noticed on TikTok, or well, not TikTok, but just social media, I don't even have TikTok, is that the people that push this self-directed thing oftentimes will make a forecast about the market and say, like, the market's going to be sideways for 5 to 10 years now. The market's going to bounce around for 5 or 10 years and potentially go nowhere. Or the market's going to drop 30%. It's like, how do you know that?
Where's this data coming from?
How do you even come up with that?
Yeah.
And what market are you talking about? Right? Like the DAX in Germany's been on a tear.
Yeah.
You know, we just saw huge rallies the last couple of years. In the market's at all-time highs, despite what people have been saying, and despite my own personal bias of disbelief, 3 years ago, right? But over time, right, the markets are just the markets, quote air quotes, right? Always. But if you think about it, like, it's always just funny. Here's another recommendation. Don't fall for just ridiculous social media sales pitches. How about that? Do you know the IRS? The IRS has actually come out with an official memo saying, do not take advice on like tax advice on social media.
It's sad that they have to come out with an official memo for that, because that means that there's been enough people that are falling victim to that type of advice. Well,
and then what happens is they implement or they take action on it without professional individualized advice or guidance. And then the IRS comes around and goes, what are you doing?
Yep.
And that's not how that works. And they get into this huge tax issue, and the people go, well, so-and-so said that's how you can do it. And boy, the stuff that people dream up on social media as appropriate is never short of baffling to me.
Yeah, that's always wild.
So, cool. What have you been working on lately?
Oh, that's a good question. I gotta think. I feel like my brain is just, it's done for today. Let's see. I've been working with some different business owners, going through some business plans and looking at taxes, doing some tax projections for them, helping them figure out that as their business is changing, how can they minimize or mitigate some of those tax liabilities, and then also just understanding what those are going to look like so they can forecast and be prepared for it instead of being surprised. Also been going through recently and did a review of permanent life insurance policy for somebody.
Okay.
And just kind of gave them some options, went through the different information and let them know my recommendation for them based on their full financial situation, that was not the best fit for them, and gave them some other options. Let's see what else.
Let's talk about that really quick.
Okay.
The life insurance thing in this town is getting ridiculous.
I don't even know if it's just this town.
It's not just this town, but in this town, there's not a shortage of people looking to sell life insurance, particularly index universal life. But there's some people that push whole life, and there's some people that push, buy term, invest the difference. And we keep getting calls, and people keep reaching out saying, I got this. I started listening to you guys, or I met you guys, or I heard of you, or a friend told us, right? And I don't actually even know what I have. Can you guys help me understand what I have? And I've only had one case where it was a situation where they actually had a term life policy, and we just looked at the term life policy and went, okay, it's like not the coverage you thought. It's not a level term, so the premium is going to potentially keep going up on you. Or it says in the contract here it's going to keep going up, right? So there were some issues with that, but it was at least they had paid for coverage and they got that. Index universal life, though, which again, just like I said earlier, our apprehension to this is not because we can't do it.
Right.
I have sold.
We can write
policies.
I
have wrote index universal life policies. I don't have anything inherently against them. They are a wonderful tool to have in the toolbox. I just did a podcast episode with David McKnight, the author of The Power of Zero. Mm-hmm. He is a very big advocate of index universal lives. I think he has a good use case for it for the right person in the right situation, right?
That's the key.
And what we see is almost universally the wrong policy being used in the wrong situations to the wrong people.
It's almost like it's being used just as a blanket solution for everything.
Let me tell you what it isn't. It isn't. Well, I'll tell you first what it is. It's life insurance. Okay.
In the event that you pass away, it provides a death benefit for your beneficiary.
Let me tell you what now let's cover what it isn't. It isn't health insurance. Okay. It isn't a trust you're setting up for your kids to be millionaires someday. It is not a bank. You're not starting your own bank. It is not a retirement plan in and of itself, right? And what it could be, if we talk about things that it could be, is it could be a way, if it very intentionally written this way, a way to insure against some of your, or all of, potentially, your long-term care costs at what I tend to call the end of retirement, right? Mm-hmm. And that's it. And it is an asset that you can borrow against for a period of time, but it is not
under the right circumstances.
The arbitrage play on index universal life insurance, where like you're going to keep making more money in the policy than the cost of borrowing the money out. Like it can work in any given year, but it almost universally won't work in all of the years.
Right.
So you really have to go to the fixed option where, and even David McKnight says that. We talked about it on a podcast I did. You have to go to the option where if you're going to borrow the money out of the policy, you need to borrow at the fixed rate and have the rider. We have a zero loan wash provision, so you're going to get credited 3% and you're going to pay 3%, right? So it's a wash. But then at that point, it's kind of like taking your own money out of your own accounts for anything else.
But people will say, but it's tax-free, Branden.
Because it's debt. That's it. There's nothing magical about it, right? It's that the insurance company is actually issuing you debt using your policy as collateral. Okay. You want to know what else is tax-free income? If you go get a HELOC on your house and max out the line, it's tax-free income in the sense that you have an asset, you've pledged it as collateral, and the bank gave you money, right? You didn't get taxed on that, but you own it. Guess what? You're going to pay an interest rate on that HELOC, but your house is still, and I'm using some air quotes here, quote unquote, invested in the market, right?
And appreciating,
hopefully, with the market. So, you pay the bank 6% on your HELOC loan and, your home goes up in value by 8%. Your magical arbitrage. But no one says, let's go set up a HELOC and I'm going to borrow all my money from my HELOC and be my own bank and have this negative arbitrage play. It just seems ridiculous when you talk about it with other assets that you can use the same concept. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because, and not to say that people don't do it, it's just you don't need to have some weird gimmicky sales pitch if you have a need for funding, right? Like if a business owner needs a short-term, they need to inject $50,000 or $100,000 of liquidity into their business for a couple months because they have a huge project that's paying off. They need to get to the finish line or they need to meet payroll, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's a tough spot to be in as a business, right? Like I'm not advocating people get there, but it happens. And yeah, like you can borrow money from your HELOC to do something like that. Mm-hmm. You don't say like, oh, I'm funding myself. Like I'm not going to use my own money. I'm going to use the bank's money. It's just weird. It's just like, you wouldn't do it. You just like kind of do it. And you just go, okay, well, it's a reasonable interest rate to borrow against, and it's cheaper than using a credit card or an unsecured line of credit or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's just looking at your multiple sources of funding and saying, taking money from this place at this cost for this amount of time meets my needs and is the best option I have available in this current scenario.
I think the biggest issue with these policies in general is just that people don't understand them. They focus on a few specific benefits and just use fear tactics and just kind of drill that in. And then people are like, oh, I need this. When they don't realize that there's so many other options to get the same or most likely better results for a less expensive cost.
Okay. One of the things that we commonly see when we review these policies is that people will illustrate out these ridiculous rate of returns. And the way that they illustrate them is always the same rate of return every year into perpetuity, right? So it'll be like 7.2% every single year forever. And I am not an absolute math wizard, but I know enough to know that is not going to happen. I mean, out of all the scenarios, any of them are going to happen, but that. It is just statistically
the one I just
impossible.
was a 6.4%.
And that is just, it's based upon, it is so often based upon a hypothetical index that the insurance company engineered and then back tested. And so they said, had we been invested this way for however amount of time, the last 6 years or 7 years, we would have had this return. And then the average annual return's 6.5 or 7.2 or whatever. And so now we're going to project that average rate of return going forward into perpetuity. Yep. And so then they're saying, well, in the current environment, we can offer somebody a 15% cap rate and a zero floor with 100% participation in this index or whatever it is, right? It's just like some ridiculous. Yeah. But they're doing it on like, so they're giving cap and participation rates in the current based upon the current interest rate environment and what's going forward. But they're showing it based on the historical information
of what they've back tested with their own information that they utilize.
In hindsight.
Yeah.
And then they go going forward without any sequence of returns iterations.
Yeah.
Completely dismissing sequence of returns risk.
It is interesting because you can find that in their little notes. If you are reading through the policy, you can find it in the small text that nobody reads. But this is something I just found. I found it in this policy that I was reviewing, and I showed that to the client, and I just said, I want you to be educated. I want you to understand what you're looking at here. Yeah. And so looking at this and knowing that this information is just hypothetical. They've created it based on what they want to show and illustrate, and it's not guaranteed because yes, right now that cap rate is at 100% and the participation rate is at 100% and the cap rate is at 15. But if interest rates change or if the environment changes from what that current environment is right now that they're illustrating, it could go down to a 50% participation rate or 25% participation rate. And so you're looking at all these numbers and this data that's showing that it's going to perform so fantastic, but they don't show you what it would look like if it actually performs how it most likely will.
And here's how it changes. So I had a client that I reviewed and they said, well, we should be getting our crediting soon, and we had the S&P 500 index as our target this last year with no cap. And I went, okay. And they said, yeah, our policy doesn't have a cap rate on the S&P 500, and that's what we hit, right? And so like last year, right? Like market was up like 25% or whatever.
We're gonna get 25% on our money.
Okay, their crediting came in, their participation rate was changed to 10%. They got credited 2.4%. In a year in which the S&P 500 did 24% over their point to point time frame. S&P 500 was up 24%, so they got 2.4%. Now, if you were looking for a very conservative vehicle, then look no further. I mean, actually, you probably should still look a lot further. But look, it's had to be right. So it's not an alternative. It's not to say like we're going to capture all of the upside of the market, right? I'm not saying like, hey, that person had the risk tolerance. They should have just been invested in the S&P 500, right? Like, no. But in the same time period, U.S. Treasuries returned 5.5%. So you had literally a return in one of the best years in the market. You had a return lower than cash on what was supposed to be sold to them as a no cap.
Well, there's just so many
there's
products out there that are available that you can invest in part of your portfolio with the correct position sizing to minimize the risk down to the correct level and still get good returns.
Yeah.
It's not the only option. But I think people love to hear there's no risk. You can't lose your money.
Which is the biggest, when people say you cannot lose your money in IULs, they are way out of line, in my opinion. And here's why. If you put, let's say you're putting $1,000 a month into this contract, right? Like this is set up as your retirement plan and you're funding it $1,000 a month. Okay. You're 4 years in. So you put $48,000 now into a contract. I have yet to ever see somebody cancel a policy 4 years in and get anywhere close to what they had put into it.
Most of the time, there's
so not only
a
did
10-year surrender fee.
Not only did they not make money, they lost big, right? So all of a sudden you go, well, and I know what everyone's going to come out of the woodwork and say, well, Branden, it's because they canceled the contract early. Yeah, I get it. People's life changes. And so the person that's putting in $1,000 a month initially, 4 years from now, might not be able to put any money in. And so you have to have a contract that's flexible enough to not do that. Or you need to have a plan design where even if you lose your job, you have the ability to fund your contract and continue to do that and not have to say, well, do I fund my life insurance contract or do I pay my mortgage or do I put food on the table or do I pay my life insurance contract or do I get my credit card paid off? Like to fund your life insurance contract at a 4 to 6% rate of return while you're racking up a 27 to 30% interest rate on a credit card is backwards, right? So again, it goes back to right time, right place. Now, the person that is more mature in their financial life, they have high income, they are doing all the other things correctly already, right? They are taking advantage of the Roth accounts. They're taking advantage of employee matches on 401ks. They're doing
taxable accounts.
Backdoor Roth stuff that may or may not be available to them, right? They are funding some brokerage accounts for that midterm money needs. They've bought a house. They're doing all the other right things, and they're just going, I'm doing all of the things and I still want, I'm just looking for other places to put money. I'm looking for something that's, relatively secure, or, relatively conservative. But I want to, have, access to it maybe before retirement or if something comes up and I need to short-term fund myself, right? Like I'm looking for some flexibility, and I'm looking for a conservative return. Then like the IUL, or whole life, depending on what your use case is, permanent life insurance becomes a reasonable vehicle.
Yeah. I feel like it does go back to kind of like that order of operations, though. You've got to make sure that you're doing the steps in the right order. Now, that's not to say that everyone's financial plan looks the same, right?
No.
It doesn't. Everyone's plan is very different, but there are certain steps that you should take in. It's like a natural succession order to help you set up your financial plan to be successful. And that is not the first step. And that's what's happening most frequently when I get calls to review these policies, is that is becoming the first step in their financial plan. They don't have an emergency savings account. They don't have a 401k or an IRA or a Roth or anything else. And they're struggling to pay for their bills or, whatever it is, but they don't have these initial things set up first.
Yeah.
And they're just jumping straight to the end to these permanent life insurance policies. And that is, I think, the most frustrating thing for me is we have to look at it as a whole.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Unfortunately, so many of the people that sell those policies will not be around in the business 5 to 7 to 10 years later when people realize the mistake that they've made in buying this, and the person that sold it to them won't be around to be accountable to that. And for the people that sell it and don't know any better, because I think there's a lot of good intentioned people out there that are doing that. They've been educated on something and they're excited about it and they're trying to share that with more people.
They've seen
truly
some
believing
benefits
truly
of
believing
it,
that they're helping. I actually sometimes feel a little bad because I think those people are putting their reputation on the line and they may have a hard time with that 10 years down the road sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it makes somebody a bad person because that they're selling these. I just don't think
I know
most of them understand it.
I know a ton of great people that are insurance agents
Me too.
in basically all kinds of insurance, including annuities, which I normally am not a big fan of at all. Right. Like again, talk about something that has like a very specific use case that way less people need it than are sold it. Right.
Yeah.
But there is always just like in any industry, right? You have your bad actors, you have your highly competent professionals, and then you have, people in the middle that are a mix of they're trying to figure it out or they don't know, or they're trying to help, but they only know how to do it a certain way.
Yeah.
Anyways. Okay. I think you asked, when we were talking, like, what should we talk about tomorrow on the podcast? So people had sent you questions recently. And so let's go through them.
Yeah, let me pull that up. Yep. So I reached out to a couple people in one of my business networking groups and just asked if anybody had some questions that they'd like to hear us talk about on the podcast, because I know there's a group of them that listen to us in there, which is pretty cool.
I hope one of them is, our mortgage rates really going to come down like all the mortgage lenders are saying? I would love to talk about that
That is not one of the questions,
of
but we can definitely talk through that because I think a lot of people would be interested.
We'll give the people what they want.
All right. So, baby steps to financial planning.
Okay.
Kind of going through that. And then let's see.
Let's start there.
Okay. Let's start there.
For what it's worth, Dave Ramsey's baby steps aren't bad. They're actually really good for most people that are looking for something that would be able to be described as baby steps.
Yeah.
Which is, no one attack me if I get these wrong.
I can pull them up real quick.
But generally it's, like
paying off debts.
Well, and I think he actually starts with, if you have people that depend on you, like get term life insurance, pay off high interest rate, or I think actually the first thing is save $1,000.
Yep.
Save $1,000.
Save $1,000 for your starter emergency fund.
Yep.
Step 2, pay off all debt except the house using the debt snowball method.
Okay. I think if you have people that depend on you, I would do term life insurance before that.
I agree. Your
family, I mean, I don't know how other people feel about their families. My family's pretty important to me. I carry term life insurance. So pay off high interest rate debt. That's like credit cards, egregious auto loans. Mm-hmm. I would say if you're worried about getting started on other stuff, like auto loans it's good to not have auto debt, but if you have it, you might not put everything else on hold till you pay that off. That's going to be a very individualized decision. Credit cards though, for sure. Student loans, probably not. Mortgage, probably not. Mm-hmm. Auto loans, questionable.
Yeah. I think that is something that you can definitely talk with an advisor about if you have questions, because I mean, when I was getting started, I didn't know that much, but I was paying off my high interest debts, which I luckily didn't have much. But like my student loans, those are not high interest, but I was working on paying those off. But I've heard so many people say, pay off all your loans, pay off all your debts before you invest. And so I was starting to do that. And then I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I like not investing and paying off a 2.5-3% loan?
Yeah.
When I could be making way more money than that. And so I started that.
Yep.
So I made my minimum payment on my student loan still, but any extra money, built an emergency savings account, and then started investing through my 401k, and then kept adding to it. And it's pretty fun to see it grow.
Yeah.
Like at first you think like, oh man, I don't have enough money to get started. And I think that's one of the common feelings is like, I don't have enough money to start. But you're always going to feel that way.
Well, I think what social media sometimes has done is, when it used to take generations to build wealth, and in the modern world of technology and information, you can compress that into a life, at first a lifetime. then decades,
Mm-hmm.
and then years. And now people want it in days.
That's true.
Right. Seriously, it's like I started saving,
Instant
and then 3
gratification.
weeks later, they're like, I don't have $10,000 in my account. What happened? I didn't get coffee this month or something. It's going to take more than that. It's going to take longer. And it goes back to what Charlie Munger said, like your first 100,000, do everything you can to get your first 100,000. And then from there, the snowball can really get moving and the numbers get exciting enough. Right.
Yeah.
I remember meeting with somebody that had like a 20% return almost in their investment account. It was a younger person, and it was a small account. It was like $10,000. So they made like 20%. They have like $12,000. And they say like, well, what else should we be doing? Should we be investing in something else? I'm like, no,
You're not going to get a better return.
No. Like, no, you should be doing like your problem is that you need to save more money, right? Like you need to get more money invested. You don't need to like figure out the investment thing. You got to get more money invested, right?
Just keep doing it. Like, keep being consistent.
And I just said, so like 20% return is like $2,000. And I get that you're not that excited about that, right? But if you had $1 million, that's $200,000, the same investment playing out, right? And he went, oh yeah. It's like, so you just have to remember, right? In your early years, it's going to have a lot more to do with how much you're saving, how aggressive you're saving. And sometimes paying off those debts free up more cash flow for you to save more aggressively. Yep. But you have to really stay the course. And it's going to probably take a couple of years for most people before you really hit that mark where you're like, oh, well, 20% on 100,000 is $20,000, and that's $20,000 I didn't work for, and I only make $85,000 a year or something. So it's like, 3 or 4 months worth of free money to me. It's like, that is when the magic really starts to happen.
You start recognizing what that really means.
20% on a dollar is 20 cents. Like that's not exciting to anyone.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very nice. But it is.
Yeah. Okay. Other baby steps. What do we got from Dave Ramsey here?
Then he goes to save 3 to 6 months of expenses in a fully funded emergency fund.
Okay. I generally agree with that. I think if you have a big lifestyle though, some people can look at it and say like, well, where could we really cut? Right? Like if you're somebody that makes a lot of money and you normally go on a trip once a month and you go, okay, if something happened, I wouldn't go on a trip every single month if I was looking for a new job. Then maybe you can take those expenses out. So you can really understand like what would your burn rate be if something happened and then 3 to 6 months of that. That's totally appropriate. But otherwise, it's a good general idea.
Step 4 is invest 15% of your household income in retirement.
I think that'll probably get most people to some kind of finish line. It might not be what you were hoping for, and you better make some really good choices with the allocations you pick and what you decide to invest in. Certainly saving 15% is not going to get you there. I think investing 15%, decent chance. But, if you think about the person making $200,000, that is not even going to fully fund their 401k and IRAs. Yeah. That's not even going to get you there.
I think it's good because if we think about it, it's a baby step. Yeah. So it's not, and this is something I do think that people forget.
It's fair call out.
Is that they think, oh, okay, I'm saving 15%. That's awesome. It's more than I, donate to my church or whatever. Like I'm saving 15%. And then they just keep that same investment rate over time instead of having that be that initial rate that they start at. Yep. I think having it start out smaller, perfect. That's great because you got to get used to it, right? You got to get used to not having that money in your pocket, part of your cash flow. Yeah. But then as you are paying off those debts, instead of having that lifestyle inflation, you inflate your investment and your savings rate.
You want to supercharge your wealth building ability would be to start now at saving 15%. If you do all these baby steps, you save 15% and then say, I'm not going to inflate my lifestyle at all with any future earnings I make. No bonuses. I'm not going to spend. I'm going to keep the same exact lifestyle I have now, and all future income I will put away. You will get to your goal probably way faster, depending on your ability to grow your income, of course. But it's the lifestyle inflation that creeps up.
Absolutely.
That kills people.
Well, and it provides you with that protection for like the 3 to 6 months of expenses and stuff. Like I just have to say that's something that my husband and I have really focused on, is not trying to allow that lifestyle
Yeah.
inflation to creep up. When we got married 8 years ago, we were both making $12 an hour.
Yeah.
Like, it was not much.
Yeah.
We had nothing. And we both committed to, like, this is the lifestyle we want. This is what we want out of life.
Yeah.
And we focused and worked really hard to try and get to that point.
Yeah.
And when I came over to do Sharm Wealth Management, things changed.
Yeah.
My income is not the same as it was previously. And so being able to make that jump and that leap to changing my income, and relying primarily on my husband's income right now as I'm starting out in this business, it's given us that affordability where we can still pay our mortgage. We can still pay all of our bills because we weren't
Overextended
and having that lifestyle creep over the last few years while we were making really good money.
Well, and now you get to build equity in your own book, right? So
Absolutely.
So now you have the ability to actually build your own asset instead of working
yes. But it's something
job.
that's given me that opportunity to make that jump and take that leap and take that risk, where if we had overextended ourselves with our mortgage or, other normal expenses that we could have decided to do, it's not something that we could have done. Like, we would be hurt.
Yeah.
Or I just wouldn't have been able to make this change.
It's hard. You become trapped.
You do.
And there's a lot of people that feel that and know exactly what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah.
It's not a fun place to be.
No. So these baby steps really do make a difference and get you to where you're trying to be. Step 5 is save for your children's college fund.
I think that one's more up to, that's probably an individual thing.
Probably farther.
Yeah. I'm not big on that. I'm not super big on that one. I think most people should be saving for themselves, investing for themselves. And then if you have the availability and the resources to help your kids, you should handle that per kid, per situation. You know what I mean? Like their situation individually and independent of your other kids at that time, depending on your life circumstances when it arises.
I agree.
I find that if you if you come into a position where you want to help your kids and the help you want to give them is so big that it would start causing like tax problems, that is such a massive number that you are far graduated from baby steps. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. So I don't know that that's like a baby step that everyone should abide by, but
I agree.
It's not, anyways.
I'd at least put it a little bit farther back, I think.
It's like probably step like 18. But
Step 6 is pay off your home early.
I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that one. Yeah. I'm out on that one. Unless your interest rate is somehow like credit card interest rate. Mm-hmm. Most people should be considering doing potentially a mix or not paying a mortgage. I'll tell you my mortgage rate is 2 3/8, and I'm not interested in paying that off right now.
Yeah.
Now, in the future, am I interested in paying that off early? Like, am I going to hold out until like the last payment's made? No, because at a certain point, like 30 years from now or 20, like even say like 20 years from now, just based on the rule 72, like my home potentially be worth a couple $1 million. And I'm not like, that's not a humble brag. That is a problem with inflation. That is,
that's another concept.
But if my payments, but if my loan's been paid down to $50,000 or whatever, $25,000, and the home is worth, say, $1.5 million or $2 million or something, there's a lot of equity that potentially isn't at work. Mm-hmm. So there might be a point where I go like, it's the value of the leverage, right? Being that cheap has kind of decayed off so much. It might not be worth missing other opportunities if I wanted to use home equity to reinvest in something else or whatever, right? Like
here's an example.
I'm not saying there's a lot there. I'm just saying that there is a calculation that you should consider when things are in front of you. And low interest rate doesn't mean you never pay it off, and higher interest rate doesn't mean you have to pay it off early. Mm-hmm. I would say very high interest rate means you probably really should look at it. But don't miss the opportunity to get an employer match on your 401k because your mortgage rate is 7%. That is like ridiculous. And I'll tell you why. You want to know what the rate of return is on an employer match? 100%. And it's guaranteed on day one. Mm-hmm. And if you know anything about sequence of returns risk, that is a great place to have 100% rate of return is at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So
this was a conversation that I had with some clients previously is they were trying to decide, do we pay off our house or do we invest for retirement?
sure.
And they're in their late 50s, early 60s, and they don't have that much for retirement yet. And so going through the numbers with them, I'm like, I know emotionally you want to have that house paid off and not have to worry about having a mortgage payment anymore. But because your rate is so low on your mortgage, they have like a 2.5%.
Sure.
Versus if they were to put the extra money into
Float it. Yeah.
into investments.
Short treasuries or something or whatever. It's something that is just tangibly yielding more than that in a significant way.
Yeah.
At least in the current situation, that would be something to consider, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's for everyone. And certain people have different risk tolerances, especially emotionally.
Yeah. Again,
But
everyone's plan is different, but
everyone's plan is different. Anyways.
yeah, I don't love
Okay.
that
Yeah,
step number
I don't
6.
love that.
Anyways, step 7, last step is build wealth and give.
Okay. I am a big fan of giving. I'm a big fan of the saying. And if somebody knows where the quote came from originally, drop it in the comments for me. But, okay. People will say that money can't buy happiness, but really what it is if you think money can't buy happiness, it means you haven't given enough of it away. And I totally am bought into that. I think helping other people, being charitable and being in a position to do that, right? Not like at your own expense, like, oh, I'm going to give money to this person, but now my kids aren't going to eat or something, right?
Right.
But being in a position to build wealth, take care of yourself, and then being able to go out and do the good in the world that you want to see done is really powerful, I think, for people spiritually and emotionally.
Absolutely.
So I think in that sense, money sort of can buy some happiness. So I'm a big fan of step 7. Step 7, totally good. Some of the steps in between, lukewarm on, and don't really agree. Some of the beginning ones are great, but overall, if you need some general baby steps to get going, Dave Ramsey, I caution you, realize when you need to be very aware of when you need to consider graduating from the baby steps.
That's a great
Okay.
point.
Otherwise, you have a hard time with step 7 and building wealth.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's another question that I think goes right along with this. Is a savings account for kids a good idea? I hear opinions on it. I hear mixed opinions on it because some people say to make that money work for you rather than giving it to a bank where it works for them. So that we've kind of covered that a little bit.
When you put money in a bank, they're taking a loan from you. When you borrow money from a bank on a loan, you're loaning money from them. Okay. So the relationship's always the same. It's just on who's on what end. But when you put money in a bank, they're choosing to just borrow money at a low interest rate from you and put it to work. Mm-hmm. Just like if the bank offered me a loan at less than 1%, I would borrow as much money as I could, up to and including $1 trillion frickin' dollars. Okay. Like I would not stop the amount of borrowing they would give me if I could borrow money at the rate people put money in a savings account. Mm-hmm. So the sentiment is right. The understanding of the nature of the relationship is wrong. But overall, the whole thing about savings accounts for kids goes back to the same thing that I've talked about on college savings, right? So what's the point? You know, you can gift this year $17,000 to your kid as an adult and not have it, and that's just your annual gift tax exemption. And on top of that, you can pay for some things like directly, right? That don't count against that either. So do you have the ability to still gift a lot of money to your kids when they need it? Mm-hmm. So opening a savings account for your kid in their name or with their name on title, I think it's silly. I think for most people, that's going to be a silly thing. Now, if you're doing complex advanced estate planning for ultra high net worth families, different conversation. If you're an entrepreneur that's paying your kids to work in the business, you need to have those accounts because you do need to pay the kids and the money needs to actually go to their account. It can't just be notionally on paper, right?
Yeah. Like I was going to say, I think there are some different circumstances, but I think in general, when you're thinking of just like the average American with a couple of kids that they want to help them save, I think if you were wanting to teach them how to save,
different
Sure.
conversation.
You can give them, give them an account, help them learn how the fundamentals of it work, why you save, how that works, all of that,
Yep.
and then give them that experience. But as far as like going back to those baby steps of what are the most important things or that order of operations, they should be taking care of themselves first, making sure that they are fully like, I'm sorry, words just left my brain, but that they're taking care of themselves.
Build wealth and then
right?
give it away.
Yeah.
And
that includes to your kids.
To your own kids.
Yes.
Yep.
Because if you don't have an emergency fund for yourself yet, if you don't have any investments for yourself yet, you should not be investing for your children, in my opinion.
Well, and I'll tell you why. It's not that I'm opposed to people giving help to their kids.
No.
I'm saying you can just do it in your own name, maintain control, and then give it to them when you're ready.
And if there's a need for something else that arises.
Or you know what? Like I have kids and I would love to believe that my kids are going to grow up to be absolutely bright, intelligent, responsible adults. I would be lying to myself, though, if I said there was not a possibility in this world that they grow up to be a young adult that has some serious challenges, right? I have met with enough families that have kids that had mental health conditions, struggled with addiction, ended up actually doing really well and just made a ton of money and didn't, you know what I mean? And didn't need any help from mom and dad. Like there's so many circumstances, good and bad, that if you put it in the kid's name, it's the kid's money. If you have it in your name, you can decide, you have the lever of control still, right? And so if the kid's in a tough spot, then you can shield them from themselves, right? It goes when good attorneys want to try to have settlements set in a structured manner or in a trust or delayed so that, somebody doesn't get a settlement that's a, drug addict and then they end up with all this money that they can use for drugs. Like there is an element of trying to protect people from themselves when it comes to money. And, sometimes as a parent, like that would be a very hard challenge to deal with, right? And to go through. And I don't wish it on anyone. Like I hope everyone's kids grow up and are stand-up citizens.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, even if they are, and you're in baby step mode, you probably can just give them the money and just say, great, so glad everything turned out so good. Yeah. Here it is. And if everything's not going so good, you don't have to tell them about it. And you can use that money to maybe support them through their challenges, right? Like you can strategically decide where it goes and what it gets spent on. So maintaining levers of control is pretty important, in my opinion.
I like that. Okay, let's see if there were any other questions. Says, when I think of financial planning, I think of having extra cash to throw around. Maybe addressing lower income people and where they can start to provide a better retirement for them or their kids. So I think that kind of goes back to those baby steps too. I
think it goes back to the baby steps. I would say, and I don't envy people in this situation at all. There are a lot of people out there in tough situations. I think some of the, like one of the most impactful things people can do really is buy a home and try to buy a home as early on as you can. Buy a home within your means, right? Don't shut yourself. But if you can qualify for a mortgage, life is stable. You don't intend on moving. You don't intend on changing jobs or careers in the next, while or whatever, right? Buy a home. And the reason why is if all else fails and you go into retirement and you can eliminate a mortgage and you don't have that housing cost and you have a decent Social Security number, it's not going to be pretty. It's not even going to be like really comfortable. And maybe you still have to like work part-time, but you're probably going to have a lot better retirement than the person that's like still renting.
Absolutely. I've seen that.
I've seen
so
seniors.
times.
I've seen situations where senior citizens their rent is higher than their Social Security. So they're still working. And their kids are trying to help support them still because they still don't have enough money. It's very, very, very sad.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate of home ownership. And kind of just because of that reason, right? Just trying to eliminate the housing expenses. Not today. It's going to be more expensive than renting today, most likely. First couple of years, it'll probably be more expensive. And
but it can be another asset for you.
Yeah, 30 years from now, it's an asset. And even though it might not produce income, it's an asset in the sense that you don't have to be paying rent, right?
You have somewhere to live.
Yeah, you have somewhere to live. You're going to use your asset. Some assets you use for income. Some assets you go to sleep in at night. it's just whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, right? Every asset is either something you eat, it's either something you eat, or it's something that produces something that it enables you to eat or sleep in it. You know what I mean? It's like, whatever.
Investing during a challenging market, do's and don'ts.
Okay. Don't get scared and wildly just hit the sell button. Do work with a professional, get advice, and work with a portfolio that's custom tailored to you and your plan. Mm-hmm. So a portfolio without a plan is not very valuable. And a plan without a portfolio is sometimes also not very valuable, right? You got to build some assets at some point. But, challenging markets is a thing of the media, not really a thing of the markets. Now, there's times where it's more difficult to trade markets, right? There's markets that are more difficult to trade than others. Mm-hmm. But there's always opportunities. I would say adjust your expectations, mm-hmm. right?
I think something that you say often on this podcast actually is that volatility is an opportunity.
Volatility is an opportunity.
I think that's something that's important for people to remember, especially if they're just getting started.
I mean, today the NASDAQ 100 opened up like 20 basis points up, and then it was down like 1.5%, and it just ended the day up over 2%, mm-hmm. which means like, okay, I'm not advocating anyone be a trader, but all I'm saying is, had you been able to like time that right, and I know this is not realistic of most people that ever look at this, but there's like let's call it a 3.5% swing. You in one day could have had a move in the market equal to, almost 3/4 of the year of cash return, right? Of like treasuries, mm-hmm. or money market. And actually for the people that have their like money markets at like the credit union and stuff, that's probably like freaking a whole year's worth.
Yeah.
in one day. Right. So not to say that you should try to time that or like, oh, what if you had done that, but to say that you have to step back and say volatility is something we choose to experience if we choose to watch the markets. Mm-hmm. It is always going to be there. Sometimes it's going to be more, sometimes it's going to be less, yep. but it's going to be there. It's the price we pay for the opportunity to have gain. Yep. Volatility is that's the price we have to pay. If everything just went, lower left to upper right in just a smooth linear line, you wouldn't get the return because there would be no risk.
Yeah.
But for as much as people say, oh, I invest in real estate because real estate just goes up, and they say, well, 2008 was an anomaly, right? If you hold it long enough, it just goes up. Yeah. And to that I say, well, go grab a chart of the S&P 500 index and just like zoom out far enough. And guess what? It just goes lower left to upper right. And yes, there is a nasty 08, right? Right there in the middle. If you zoom in far enough, it's huge and it was really impactful and it sucked for the people that lived through it, right?
It's based on timing, right? And these other factors.
But there's people that got out in 08 and never got back in the market. They sold, they never got back involved, and they have missed the opportunity for 16 years now, mm-hmm. right? And so what you have to do is remember the long game. Now, for the people that are really close to retirement, it becomes very challenging, very scary, because mm-hmm. you don't have the same opportunity to just say, well, markets come back and I'll just ignore it, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're the guy that you're making $150,000 a year. And if you have $1 million saved in a 401k, which is a normal, it's not a normal number, but it's not an unnormal number,
It's not unusual.
But a 15% drop in the market, you see a year's worth of your hard-earned money. Mm-hmm. You're like, that's gone. So all of a sudden you're like, I'm getting out of here. And you sell. And then the market eventually is going to keep going higher, and you're making huge, impactfully detrimental mistakes to your long-term plan, right?
You have to stick. That did this. In 2008, he took out all the money that he had in his 401k, put it in a savings account, paid the 50% tax penalty because he was not of retirement age yet.
So he lost 50% of his money in the market, and then paid 50% on what was left.
Yep, and then he never put it back in. And so now he's in his early 70s. He's still working because he doesn't have the money to retire. He could maybe pay for a year, maybe 2 years in retirement with the amount of funds that he has that he put into a savings account because of that panic.
You have to stay the course. And some courses are not fun to stay the course on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you will see it. sometimes you will see your account doing great, your investments doing great, and the market's doing bad. And sometimes you'll see your stuff doing bad and the market's great. Mm-hmm. And whatever, sometimes you'll hear that the bond market's doing great, but your portfolio's down, or the bond market's doing great, your portfolio's up. It's just, everyone's portfolio is actually so different, and the news makes it sound like, wow, this is all great. What it all ties back to is you need to have a individual, like a portfolio with a purpose, right? So like, why do you own what you own? And what's it for?
Frame?
What's your time frame? Do you have stuff that aligns with that time frame? I talked to somebody, a client recently. This was back in beginning of August when we had the huge volatility spike, and they had just retired recently, and I was calling some of those clients that I knew they'd be watching, and I knew that they have, you know what I mean? They're in a position in life, right, where they're more likely to be, you know, not just nervous, but scared potentially, right? And that's when people make poor decisions. So, you know, with those clients, I know my clients well enough. You try to be proactive. So I called them up, and, you know, as I assumed, yeah, things are looking really scary. You know, what should we do? Should we get out of the market and sit on the sideline? Should we do this? You know, and I said, what we should do is stay the course. We shouldn't change anything. Today would be a disastrous day to change anything. Yeah. Right? Oh, are you absolutely sure? Yes. You have, according to your financial plan and your distribution rate and all this stuff, right? You have 10 years worth of cash. So if the Fed dropped the interest rate to 0 today, you still have 10 years before we have to think about like rebalancing. Oh, so now we've rebought that time. Does that make sense? Like, we've rebought that time. Now there's a price he pays for that. And that is that he's not fully invested in the equity market the same way, but he's able to stay the course because it's that reminder. It's like, hey, we have a plan here. We understand the cash flow. We understand the needs. We have the emergency reserve. We have that bucket to tap into. And we have tried to recession proof this plan for you. And because of that, he's okay. All right. I trust you. Yeah. And we haven't changed anything. It's a month and a half later now. It's not fun. It's been a really wild ride the last month and a half. It's not fun. It doesn't make it fun. It just makes it survivable. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest benefits of working with a professional, a financial advisor, because they're looking at the whole picture rather than an individual trying to do it for themselves. They don't know how to look at all of these different aspects or these different factors. And so then one thing can throw off the entire course. It's keeping that perspective and understanding that we do have a plan. We do understand what this is for, and what our backups are, and like worst case scenario and all of that kind of stuff. We have that. And so then that can provide that comfort and that peace of mind. Because as financial advisors, we can't provide certainty, but we can provide clarity.
Yeah. That's a really fair way to say it. I like that. Well, hopefully that answers some of the questions people had. Yeah. I love just getting questions from people and being able to talk about them. So if anyone, if by some miracle somebody's still listening to this podcast, please shoot us a question. Yeah. Send it to my, you can email me, Branden@DucharmeWealth.com. You can hop on our website at DucharmeWealth.com. Just submit a question on there. You can reach out to Carisa or myself. You can reach out to any of our advisors actually, and, or, drop it in the comments, message us on Instagram or Facebook. If you have questions, you have something we want to talk about, we'd love to talk about it on here.
We want to talk about what's important to you.
And quite frankly, if you're the person that's going, I think what you said today was wrong, and you have some kind of different opinion, I'm happy to have you on the podcast and we can talk about it. I'm not dogmatic. I just think people should get individualized advice. It's generally my approach. Yeah. But yeah, I'm happy to have anyone on. Or if you think there's somebody really intelligent that I should, talk to, I also want to talk to that person. Is that fair? Yeah. I will talk to basically anyone. I've had people on this podcast now that are authors, institutional portfolio managers, private, have worked in private family offices, like the DuPont family office. I have had on insurance agents of all kinds, property casualty, Medicare now, life insurance, annuity people. I've had real estate
Commodities traders.
Yeah, commodities traders. Yeah,
All sorts
I
of
love it
stuff.
all. There's a lot of
great.
great information out there, and I like talking about all of it. So
Yeah.
if you know somebody that should be a guest, introduce me. And if you feel like you're getting either patently bad advice, you're worried you're getting bad advice where you're at, or you just want a second opinion on what are you missing, right? Reach out. We do free consultations all the time for people.
No obligation consultations.
Branden Ducharme is an investment advisor representative of and offers investment advisory services through SCF Investment Advisors Incorporated, an SEC registered investment advisor, 10150 Meanly Drive, first floor, San Diego, California, 92131, 800-955-2517, www.scfsecurities.com. SCF Investment Advisors Incorporated and Ducharme Wealth Management are separate entities. The information in this podcast is current at the time of recording. It is based upon sources and data believed to be accurate and reliable. The information, opinions, and forward-looking statements expressed herein are subject to change without notice. Moreover, all comments and opinions voiced herein are for informational and entertainment purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations and should not be interpreted as such. Further, the opinions expressed are Branden Ducharme's and his guests and do not reflect the views and opinions of SCF Investment Advisors or any of its affiliates. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what is appropriate for you, consult your financial professional. This information is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized tax or legal advice. Ducharme Wealth Management and SCF Investment Advisors do not provide legal or tax advice. These services are provided by separate entities. The guest speakers featured in this podcast are not affiliated with SCF Investment Advisors, nor are they affiliated with Ducharme Wealth Management unless otherwise indicated. Information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions and answers to questions do not involve the rendering of personalized investment advice, but are limited to the dissemination of general information. A professional advisor should be consulted before implementing any of the options presented. Encompass More Asset Management LLC is a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements.